Hey everyone. If you love this podcast, can you do me a big favor and please give us a review on whatever platform you're using and tell a friend or family member to subscribe? And speaking of subscribing, that's the best way to keep up because you'll get a notification each time we upload a new episode. So make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform you're now using. Finally, if you're feeling generous, appreciative, or perhaps a bit guilty for getting all this free content, go to patreon.com/The Suzanne Venker Show and become a member. You'll get free ebooks, early access to the episodes, and a chance to win the occasional free 30-minute coaching session with yours truly. From the magnificent Midwest, it's the Suzanne Venker Show, where men and women are equal in value but wildly different by nature. Join us here every week as we challenge the culture's hugely flawed narratives about men, women, sex, and love. From coast to coast and from around the world, thank you for joining us. Hey, everyone. So a new poll in the U.S. suggests, you probably heard this last week or the week before, because it got a lot of coverage, that classically American values such as religion and having children, even having children, believe it or not, have receded in importance over the past 25 years. Only 30% of 2023 respondents overall said having children was very important to them, compared with 59% in 1998. That is pretty unbelievable. And 1998, by the way, happens to be the year that I was married. So this is it's interesting for me to think about how this has happened in conjunction with the very years that I got married and had kids. The one and only value, however, that has increased in importance to Americans over these past 25 years, where people are in agreement, is money, which moved from 31% to 43%. One of the pollsters of this particular poll noted that these differences are so dramatic that it paints a new and surprising portrait of a changing America. So in light of this new data, I wanted this month's parenting episode to focus on how parents can still raise their kids with old school values in spite of this news and in spite of what's going on culturally. And as always, I have my husband, Bill, here with me to talk about how we did this ourselves with our kids. Welcome back to the show, hubby.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everybody.
You don't have to talk that loud.
Well, I want to make sure they can hear me.
We are using the same microphone because we have not figured out. We have two separate microphones, but my podcast producer's like, you can't actually use both. So now we're kind of trying to see if I come in like this, it's going to be kind of annoying.
I think it's just because Suzanne wants to be close to me.
Okay. All right. So anyway, we're going to try and do this. We might sound a little funny. Eventually, when we get this down, we'll figure out how to have our own microphones so we don't have to. Of course, it doesn't mean anything to you, but if you saw us, it looks pretty funny on this end. Okay.
I have to say that poll was very depressing, Suzanne, because when you think about it, it's like money is now trumping relationships, because marriage is about relationships, and that's what
100%.
That's what having kids and a family is about. So now it's like, well, we don't care about relationships; we just care about money. That's pretty sad.
Yeah, it's
lonely.
I feel so strongly about it. I'm having a hard time coming up with proper words. I want to say it's just so sad to me. Okay, so just to back up a little bit before he and I get into it, this new data, the Wall Street Journal's headline for it was, quote, "America pulls back from values that once defined it." But in fact, in reality, a closer look at the results shows stark generational and partisan divides. For instance, when it comes to patriotism, and none of this will surprise you, only 23% of Democrats say this is very important to them, compared to 59% of Republicans. And when it comes to religion, same thing. 27% of Democrats say this is very important to them, compared to 53% of Republicans. Again, none of that's surprising, but what is notable about this study, in my opinion, is the fact that there's less of a gap between the two parties when it comes to having children. And that, to me, was the saddest part of the whole thing. 26% to 38%. 26 Democrats, 38 Republicans. So still, obviously, Republicans value it more than Democrats, but that's actually not a huge gap, at least not as big as those other gaps. And then on top of that, Americans are apparently in complete agreement on the value of money. That's the one and only value that has risen in importance. And I find both of these together, placing less value on family and more on money, as striking and sad. And it makes complete sense when you look at our culture today. So again, none of this is surprising. It was just really jarring to see it in the paper with these numbers. While the study showed that all age groups attach less significance to things like religion, patriotism, and having kids than when pollsters asked them about it in 1998, it's definitely younger Americans in particular who place the lowest importance on this. So certainly this is being driven by a trend with the younger generation, and we've read about that in the paper or whatever in the news. So there's a difference between those of us who are older and younger as far as how they view that. It's just very trendy to, put kids last or whatever. So anyway, in light of this new data, I just thought it would be a good opportunity for Bill and me to talk about how, like I said, we raised our kids with old school values despite living in a culture that is going in a different direction. And it was not easy. And I know a lot of you would like, to hear about and just talk about how to do that. Go ahead,
Well,
Bill.
before we go on here, I have a question. I don't know. I wish I knew more about the study. I know the article you're talking about, but what strikes me is I want to know why these young people don't want to have kids. Like, what is the reasoning between the Democrats and the Republicans? Because in my mind, I'm thinking it has to do with fear of the world. They don't want to bring their kids into a world that's what's doing it right now, which is actually the wrong way of looking at it, because we need more people to stop the lunacy. But anyway, what do you remember anything?
You're asking the difference between the age groups or the parties?
Both.
Okay, the parties I think is just strictly, we know that those on the right are more family focused than those on the left. I think that's probably why in terms of the two parties. In terms of the generational thing, I think that's an issue of money. Well, I don't think. I mean, they've actually come out and stated that it is a matter of money. And we're not going to get into this too much today with the money piece, but that's the argument that they would give, that they can't afford them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, think about it. They're not even getting married. Marriage is pushed off as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they give an argument that they can't get married because they can't afford to get married, which again, that's a whole different episode, because that is not a reason to avoid marriage, but that's what they would say.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I keep thinking too, the fact that people are focusing on money. It's not necessarily that. I think it's more that they want more money because they feel like they can't keep up with the world and the life they're living in.
Oh, for sure. And yeah.
But we can talk about some of that, because I feel like we think about all the things that we have now that we didn't have, say, 50 years ago, that are in our lives that are around money, that are wasteful. So things like the internet, things like cable TV, things like cell phones, all of those things add up to money that we didn't have before.
Keurig.
Yeah, Keurig, right. Coffee.
My K-cups.
Instantaneous coffee in a little thing. I mean,
we really could do a whole thing on this. We have to write down the list. I mean, that's just scratching the surface.
Remove all those things and go back to Walden Pond.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden simplify your life. You're a gazillionaire.
Well, there's no question that there is a way to live on less when we choose to and when we have to. And the pandemic was a perfect example of proof that we can.
Oh, yeah.
But again, I think that's a whole different
episode.
Yeah. Okay. So
lower, like with my mother, where she
come
used where my mother used lower wattage light bulbs in the house.
Yeah.
10 watts. You could barely see anything. You had to need a flashlight just to walk around the house. But yeah. Okay, anyway, sorry.
That's a little extreme, William, but okay. Okay, you got to get close to the microphone, honey. So do I.
Okay, here, I'm right now.
This is very we're going to get this. We're going to get this down. Okay.
This is going to be hard for me because I might want to start making out with you while we're sitting here.
Oh my God. Okay. So we have a list here of the things that we, being empty nesters, and and I think I've mentioned that our 25th wedding anniversary is coming up next month, and that's corresponding with this poll. Like I said earlier, is that it's over this exact period of time that we got married and had children and raised them and launched them, that these new attitudes are coming into being. So it's depressing. But anyway, so we listed a bunch of things here that we could think of that were ways in which we raised our family that was very countercultural. And believe me, it was not easy. I mean, going against what most people are doing is very, very difficult. And quite frankly, I think why most people don't do it. But we're just simply going to describe it and give people options for how you can do things the old school way so that you can launch. I guess a good way of putting it is, you know, responsible, mature, not unentitled kids. And I think that in order to do that, you really do have to reach back in the way things used to be, because I think today is a lot harder to do that.
Well, and
Okay.
giving them the tools to be personally responsible and able to take care of themselves in the real world when
Right.
they finally launch, and they're eager to do it as opposed to afraid of doing it or living in the basement.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Okay. So the first one is kind of the most obvious, and that is that we had a traditional family structure or arrangement, meaning mom at home, dad at work during those early years. So that would be the most obvious traditional, kind of old school way. Now, at the time, it was not, I mean, it wasn't as I mean, gosh, that's 25 years ago. It it was not unusual. It wasn't I don't know what the numbers were. I didn't look this up, but it was not unusual. Uh,
No, I
eh,
would no 25 years ago, no, because there were a lot of yeah, no, I know what you're saying.
but there's no question it was still split. Like, you knew in the neighborhood who was home and who wasn't. So it was, probably a good 50-50. Maybe not that, but that equal. But at any rate, so that arrangement is obviously an old school structure, and plenty of people still do it. And plenty of people still can do it, despite what you have heard from the media, what you will hear from people around you telling you that that's impossible. That's not true that it's impossible. It's impossible. You might not, impossible is not the right word. It's true that it's true that you can't, I want to say this right. You can't live the same way you would live or did live pre-kid, um, when you have one income, but it doesn't mean you can't or that you'll suffer terribly, simply that you have to adjust your lifestyle, and you're going to do that depending on what your priorities are.
Well, yes, I would say this, that when you're knee deep in littles, this is preschool kids, you're so focused on just daily survival and getting them up, getting them clean, feeding them, giving them baths, giving them naps, reading to them, doing the day to day tasks, that there really isn't time for anything else anyway. And you
And
really don't want to be doing anything else other
that's a
than
good point.
coming home.
That's true.
And, I still remember Emma couldn't talk, but the minute I walked in the house, she was sitting in we had a tub filled with books, and she was hold
Yeah.
the book waiting for me to read. And she'd come over to me and give me the book, and then I would read the book. And so it forces you to slow down your life, and it's such a
Uh,
wonderful gift. It
yeah.
is a very special time. It is a short time, but it's an opportunity to save money if you
Yeah.
live a really simple way.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just got an email from someone today who just came home to. I might get them all the time from people who have. So I know it can be done because I get the details on how they did it, um, and it's, I guess, the only thing I can liken it to is look what we had to do during the pandemic. That's the best example I
Yeah.
have. Look
Yeah.
at what we did.
Yep.
All of a sudden, you had to figure it out, and we did. We did. In fact, there's news now that that people are working less than they did before the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic because they realize that they're working more, and they don't. But they're not.
They're not as
they'd
happy.
rather live that slower
Yeah.
life and forego the income. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's really about,
Which goes back to the focus becomes about relationships rather than the money. When you're focusing on the money, you're always exhausted, you're tired, you're aggravated, you're stressed out. When you're just trying to make a living as opposed to accrue
amass wealth,
a huge amount
like
of money that you're going
yeah,
to get all together and die 10 years after you
yeah.
accrue it, and you've lost all this life you didn't get to live.
I mean, you have a long time to do that, and this is just a small window. It's such a small window. Anyway, so that's the most obvious kind of old school way is having a parent at home in those early years.
Yep.
Okay, you want to say number 2?
No, you go ahead.
Okay, we got so much shit for this.
Who?
We did for this.
Oh, when we were around our friends and people?
Yeah,
Sure.
So we don't know anybody who knew Little House and Waltons, but our kids grew up with Little House and the Waltons, and of course that wasn't a thing for our generation, for our children's generation. For yours and mine, it was, Bill.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
for our kids, you had to go to MeTV or go to some channel that I guess most people didn't use. So we were just known as those parents so the kids would talk about the kids from Waltons and Little House, and nobody had any idea what they were talking about.
I grew up watching the Waltons when I was a little boy, and I remember loving it. My grandfather, we'd have my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, over for dinner on Thursday nights, and he would stay and watch it with us, and then he would go home. But it was just such a great show, and I thought about it, and really, it's a show about his generation, because he was born in 1900. And so the dad in the story, Mr. not the grandfather, but the dad was born around that time, 1900. So these are people his age and his generation. So all the things about the simplicity of life, the kids walking to school without shoes on, and that, just have very simple means. They have enough to feed themselves. They've got shelter. They have the basic necessities, and they're living a great life.
And just for the record, we're not suggesting that people be happy living on.
Sure, no.
In fact, the reason why I was really into that show was because the lessons that were taught are 100% timeless.
Family lessons, timeless, and teaching you how to become an adult. Yes,
life lessons.
These are lessons teach you how to become an adult.
It doesn't matter what year you were born in. It doesn't matter what year you live in. They are timeless. They are just as significant today as they were then. So those are the things that I wanted. Those are the lessons that I wanted. We wanted our kids to get. So that's why
even when they were little, they loved it. Henry was like, "Can I watch the Waltons again today?"
Like, here's an example. The Waltons kind of came later, but when they were really young, Little House. Because Waltons is kind of for when you're older.
He was like 6 or 7, I think, and he enjoyed it.
Well, I don't know. I just remember a lot of Little House and when they were really young, and like, here's just a silly example. It just happens to be one that I remember. Nellie. Nellie was the mean girl.
On Little House.
On Little House, and the message was, and of course, everybody deals with mean people in their school, right? So this is a perfect time for them to understand what they're watching based on what they're experiencing in school. So the lesson was very clear coming from the Ingalls family in describing why Nellie was this way to their kids. And I don't remember exactly what they said, but the clear understanding was that it's not you when someone's mean to you, it's them. They're unhappy. They are lashing out. They are this, they are that. And it's not personal. So you have to understand that they're sad inside. Yep. Somebody who's mean is sad.
Yep.
Now that's an example of just a timeless lesson that you can learn as a kid from watching another kid do that.
Who's a bully.
That.
Basically, they call it bullying now. And there's a lesson in that. I don't know. That's a whole nother subject, but there's something to be said about having to experience bullying as a youngster, because then you have a lesson and it doesn't just go away. It happens even as an adult, and you have to figure out how to deal with that in an appropriate way. So there are certain things like that. And I know they try to shelter people from bullying, and I get it. I do get it. But in some ways, you almost have to let the kids kind of get on the schoolyard and figure it out.
That's a good point. So that would be an example of old school parenting versus this
Yeah.
new trendy. Make
Right.
sure no one ever gets their
Well, and
feelings
that's
hurt.
and if you're engaged with your kids, you will know that your child was bullied, and you will
Exactly.
say, "Come over here, Henry. This is what
Yeah.
you do
Yeah.
when little Jim Bob comes over
Yeah.
and hits you on the head. You defend yourself and push him back or whatever, and then he'll leave you alone."
Right. Okay, and then a couple of other these are a little more. They're not as involved. They're kind of obvious and simple. But one is this is just I don't know why I thought of this, but we didn't allow TVs in the car, and when our kids were young, that was a thing. It just became a new thing that you could
The
put the
DVD
TV in the
player,
car.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
the TV in the
TV,
car.
yeah.
So we bought them 100%. We allowed them for long car trips. They
Yep.
were fabulous for long.
For vacations, like
it
we
was
drove halfway
awesome.
across the
Yeah.
country.
And so we loved the idea then. That was great.
Yeah.
I thought that was wonderful. But then people just put them in their cars. Like you just get in the car and go to Target and you watch TV
Yeah,
on the way to the
no.
car. Oh my God, I had such strong reaction to that.
Well, you're missing out on all the conversations.
I know. I'm what and how are you going to deal with just downtime and silence?
Well, it just
and
you become easily addicted to the screen. Then you
Yeah.
give them phones, and they're
Yeah.
all the faces in the phone the whole
Yeah.
time instead of talking to you.
There
Or
you go.
I mean, it's just
Yeah. So
that's not raising the kids. You're letting the TV raise the kids.
So they don't have those anymore, do they?
What?
I mean, I'm sure people use them for.
Some of them are in the car, like they have a
that's
TV
right.
in the car that comes down from the ceiling.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And they have like
Yeah.
3 of them.
Okay.
Like every seat has one. It's lunacy.
See, so does this make us old school? The fact that I didn't
Yeah.
even know that, I forgot about that. Yeah. Oh my
And
gosh.
why would you pay
Okay.
more for that? I don't know. I mean, the cars are already expensive. They're making it worse.
Okay, and then let's see. What else?
I get the back massager in the seats. That's the better thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly, because that's for the adults.
Yeah.
Okay, here you start. You here go.
What, family dinners?
Yeah,
Well, didn't we talk about that the other day?
we might have.
But yeah, family.
yeah.
But again, family dinners is another.
It's considered old school today.
I know, which is really sad.
Yeah.
I mean, it really should be a whole new trend. Imagine having a relationship with your children where you have dinner and you talk about life and what happened that day. And that's how you learn that little Jimmy was abused or was a bully was beating up on him.
Yeah.
And what do I do, Dad?
Yeah. Okay, and then we do have this. I guess this is considered old school. Yeah, it is considered old school today because one of the things that has declined, as we said in the opening, is religion.
Yeah, and faith. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll let you do this.
Well,
this
that
is
was
your department.
so. Suzanne's mom was raised Catholic, and then she became Presbyterian with her husband. And Suzanne was baptized Presbyterian. But one thing that always attracted me to her was that she was more Catholic. In terms of what I mean by that is that she was very family oriented. I'm not saying that Presbyterians aren't, but just the way she talked about family and kids, and it just felt very familiar to me. And when I met her, I had dated many ladies before I actually found her, but the Catholic stuff for me was always that kind of religious school has many different facets to it. It's not just the religion piece. It's definitely helpful, but then you also have another part, which is there's all these other parents who know all the kids. And they're all, so you walk home. I used to walk home, but all the other moms knew who I was, knew what I was up to. They'd all talk to each other about, oh, there's Bill and there's so-and-so, and look, they're walking, and what are they doing? And oh, blah, blah, blah. So you have multiple parenting around you all the time. And these people care about you. And
I don't know that went on though when our kids went to school. That was your
experience. No, it was
right?
my experience. Yeah. I mean, but I'm just saying that you still get a facet of that in the schools today still, because you have kids playing on sports teams and they know each other's parents and they know their stories, and they may know that little Jimmy's dad lost his job and whatever. That helps because you have other role models who are not just your parents, who are also there, who are like substitute parents in a way, who are just reinforcing what your parents are doing. And not to say that all of them are good, but you get to see all these different personalities. And we were big into,
I guess, sorry,
like we would pray at dinner, and then we would pray when they went to bed.
And we went to mass for a long time.
And we went to mass.
It was older when we got away from it.
It was hard when they were younger. or at least for Henry, because he couldn't sit
Younger.
still when he
Oh,
was
you mean when
little.
they were
Little.
like little,
When he was
yeah.
little, it was not.
We used to fight about that because I'd be like, "Why are we taking a baby in mass?" Because I didn't grow up.
But it worked
doing
out.
that.
He's totally fine now.
Yeah. I just, yeah.
But then after a while, like we still attend services, but I don't make the kids. They're old enough now to make their own decisions, and hopefully
they're
they'll.
launched. Yeah,
I know. Hopefully they'll come back to it, or they'll see the value of it. I think they will. I think they do.
So I don't know if that counts as old school parenting, but I put it in there because to me, I feel like, with the decline of religion, I think it constitutes old school parenting, kind of thing.
Yeah. And to be fair about it, there's so many things are so tainted. People get tainted by the religious stuff. And I'm going to say this. So one thing I always look at it is the people who run different religious organizations are human beings, just like doctors are human beings. They make mistakes. They have fallibility. And the key thing for me was I was there to be in the presence of God. That's why I was at the service. So if somebody said something, like a priest said something I didn't agree with, I just ignored him and just prayed, because that's what I was there for, and prayed to God and read the scripture, and I focused on those things. And other times, the priest said what I liked. So it's just one of those things where you can't let human behavior get in the way of your faith. I'll just put it that way. Okay. And it's important for the kids to see that.
Yeah.
It's important for them to see that.
Right. Well said. Okay, and then I have something here.
Plus it's another, the other thing about religion is another layer of parenting. So the behaviors are, you're not going to kill somebody. I mean, you don't steal from somebody. You don't oogle some guy's wife or whatever. There's all these things that it's not just mom and dad saying that behavior is not correct. It's the big guy in the sky saying that behavior is not correct.
It's extremely, it's hard for me to imagine raising children without any religion. So I can't even, I don't know. I guess that's a whole other conversation. And like I said, I don't.
I think it makes it harder. Personally, I really do think it makes it a lot harder.
I do too. Okay, so then I wrote something here about good manners, and I think, I don't know that the only reason I would consider this old school. Let me tell you why. Because it's not like I don't think people, well, certainly everybody I know teaches their kids good manners, but there are certain things that were just much more set in stone decades ago. Everyone sort of agreed on how to do certain things. Like, for example, handshakes, right? When you meet somebody, you shake their hand and you give them eye contact. You look them in the eye. I think that's something I don't see so much anymore with young people. They don't say necessarily hello and goodbye, thank you, please, and really look at you. And it's just a very different feel from the way things used to be. So I feel like we really hone that in with our kids, and so I guess I could consider that an old school thing. I wish it wasn't an old school thing, but I guess it is.
Well, those are in some sense, it is an honorable thing to do, to acknowledge someone's presence and who they are. So that was one way of doing it, is shaking the hand and looking them in the face. We seem to have lost all of these skills to a large extent. It was something that was just an expectation, like a natural expectation, that was what the behavior was deemed. And now it's we don't want to be mean to our kids and make them shake someone's hand if they're not comfortable with the person. Well, how are you going to learn? And the kid's a little kid, so you got to start somewhere and kind of break that, because relationships are about everything, people. You can't do anything without a relationship, and more studies are proving that. There's a book that Sue's found called The Good Life? That just came out. That's about, basically, it pretty much says people who live a long life and a good life have really strong relationships with people, with their family members, with friends, with coworkers, with spouse. It's a huge thing. Their kids. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's why we're here.
Okay, next one is screens. Being on screens versus outside. Oh my God, this is huge. This is so huge for parents. Let me just say this, and you can give me from your perspective, Bill. Here's what makes me sad. Again, we did not have to deal with screens for the first 10 years. I mean, TV, of course, that's been around forever, but there's no phones. There were no phones raising our kids. We weren't on them. They didn't exist. The kids don't.
They existed. We just didn't use them.
No. The first 10 years, I don't even think they were a thing yet.
Well, I had a BlackBerry.
Oh, that's
right.
I
had cell phones.
I forgot that. Yeah, for work.
For
that's
work.
True.
And that's all it was.
Okay. But I'm thinking about people who are raising their children from birth with phones in the world, and it breaks my heart because I do feel for parents because the way we communicate and live involves the phone so much. In fairness to them, I can't imagine what it would be like to vacillate between living on the phone and being with your children the old school way, which is what this podcast is about. I didn't have to do it. So I want to be, extend some grace there and say, I can't imagine,
Mm-hmm.
So I can only think about it like for our own kids and what I could imagine having to do if I had kids, little
Right.
kids who needed my attention, and the rules I'd have to instill for myself and them. Well, they wouldn't have them at all, but like, okay, I'm getting off track about adults using it. I was thinking more about.
Yeah, let's back up. Okay. Let's say this. So the thing about it is, imagine what it was like when we were younger. I hate to come back to this like some old man going, back in the old days. But the reality is that screens, I think, suck out imagination. It kills imagination. It kills creative play because you're basically using the phone or the TV or computer to do something, to play a game, as opposed to creating a game and going outside and making something up with your neighbors. It's hard to do when all your neighbors are inside on their screens and you're a little kid and you're outside by yourself and you're like, why am I out here by myself? Nobody else is around me. That makes it hard. It kills kids' creativity. It kills their ability to navigate in their own little world. I always think about this sometimes, about how there were two different cultures, and Stand By Me is one of those movies that kind of gives you that juxtaposition. You have the adult world and you have the kid world, and there's all these levels in between, and they teach you when you're young all these great things about the adult world and about the kid world, and these are all tools and things you can use when you're an adult that you can gain. If you're in front of a screen all day, you're not living in the real world. You're not. You're in the virtual world, and that's a dangerous place, in my opinion, because it's just it kills growth.
And so in order to raise your kids, in the old school way, when you have all this around you, it's like, that's the answer. So like, what do you do? So all I can do is talk about what we did, which once they were older, we didn't have the phone issue so much, but like, I remember it was a big issue with Henry. We talked about this before with getting him off the Xbox or whatever.
Or the Wii or whatever.
And that transition is very difficult, especially for boys, to get out of one thing and go into another. That's extremely difficult. So we had a system where it's like, okay, you're going to have 10 minutes. You're going to wind it down. You can't just say, get off, like right in the middle of it and tear it off. Like that's not effective. But once you have that system in place, you have to be consistent with it. That's really the kicker, because people will start and then stop, or they're not around enough to be consistent about it. But basically it was hell. I mean, it was really super hard. And that's before phones. Like, I can't even get my head around the number of things you'd have to do that with. But if you want, you have to find a way to know that even though it's harder, that pain is going to be rewarded down the road, and just not worry and think about the pain of it at the time and going against the grain and all of that, because it will come back. It's really a short period of time.
It does get better because it seems like torture, but you're right. What ended up happening with him is that as he got older, he became less interested in those things. Like, he would just naturally do an hour and then be like, okay, this is boring. I mean, you would catch him every once in a while playing with one of his friends online. He'd do it for a while, but then generally he would go off and do something else. He'd go outside and shoot hockey pucks into a net. He'd do something. He wasn't just...
But I'm convinced if we weren't there, I mean, mostly it was me during the week anyway, and then on the weekends, you too. if we hadn't done that, he would have been on there
Oh
oh
God,
my
yes.
God, he would never have
Yep.
gotten himself off. There's
Yep.
just no way. So that's a different kind of childhood. It's just if you spend hours a day on a screen as opposed to being outside and doing things,
It,
those are two different
well,
childhoods.
it
And
just makes it brutal when you don't have other friends around to do things with. I
yeah,
mean, in some ways, I'm thankful that where we lived when he was younger, there were neighbors, there
yeah,
were girl neighbors that he would go run around with and do things with. And then we moved again, and we moved closer to where there was a boy that was there all the
yes.
time.
Joe, are you listening? Joe
And
likes
so
this
Joe would
podcast.
play with him. So and that was more age appropriate. He was old enough to be hanging out with Joe. We're talking about Stand By Me time, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. So,
But to find other people, I think, is the key. Find
yeah,
other people in your neighborhood, or even if you just have one family or
right.
two that will do it the way you do it. That's a game
Or a
changer.
teammate if he's playing, if they're the boy or the girl playing a sport, or they're doing Girl Scouts or Boy Scout, whatever they're doing, that's this extra activity, and there's somebody in that group they like, have them come over. Or it makes me sad, because I remember riding my bike all over the place, and I would go see friends, and we'd go play basketball in their backyard. That stuff is gone. I don't think really anybody does that. And I'm talking like a couple of miles on a bike to go
Yeah.
see somebody.
No, they
And
don't.
that times are done.
That's why you have. Yeah, I know. That's why.
It
Okay.
just makes it so hard.
Okay, we have a couple more things here. One, let's do this one first, and let's end with the most important one because it's kind of bigger. I'm not gonna do that one. The value of a job or working for pay. That is something that it's become old school because my analysis of it is that organized sports and travel sports has taken over what Bill was just talking about in terms of running around with your friends out in the yard. And that came about because moms aren't home anymore, and so we needed to come up with organized sports. That's a
There's also a lot of money
it,
involved in
it,
it, Suzanne, like billions of
well, yeah,
dollars.
yeah, but I mean, like the way we got here to begin with was that you couldn't have kids running around because moms weren't calling them in for dinner and they're not around to watch out for them. So if no one's home, someone's got to watch the kids, and if you're going to
Right.
watch the kids, you got to organize sports. Blah, blah. But yeah, big money in it for sure. But what I think happened there was back in the day, people got jobs after school jobs or Saturday jobs just for a few
Mow
hours,
lawns.
mow
In the
lawns,
summer, they
whatever.
mow lawns.
That was normal.
Yeah.
Um,
There's still some people
eh,
that do that, some boys, but not, or babysitting. Girls
yeah,
do the
yeah.
babysitting. It's out there. It happens.
Well, it happened with our kids, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is, just teaching that value of work, that you work for your money,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's value in work,
Mm-hmm.
I think got lost in the sports hype.
Mm-hmm.
It's just an old school thing that I think was
Well,
kind of the norm, and it's no longer the norm, and that's sad. You got to go out of your way to teach, and sort of command, this is what you're going to do,
and it's painful. It can be painful. I mean, getting them to do it is not necessarily a lot of fun, but it's so, once they start to see, hey, I'm getting money. Oh, well, wow, now I can do whatever I
Yeah,
want.
right.
And
It's
at one
like,
point, Henry, I said, look,
they
Santa
both have.
Claus isn't going to buy you another
Yeah,
Xbox.
yeah.
We've already done that. And so if you want one, make your own money and buy it yourself, which is what he
Yeah.
did.
Well, we had a rule that once they were 16, they had to get a job, both of them. Henry happened to do it 2 years earlier, but the rule was you're 16, you get a summer job. Now we're not talking about during the school year. But yeah, I had a summer job. How old were you with your first summer job?
15.
15. I was
But
16.
the other thing is that you learn relationships again. You learn how to navigate the world. You have bosses, you got coworkers, you got people that you don't like, that you're not sure about, or that you're, hesitant about. Then you got other people that you become friends with. And it's just, you learn how to navigate different personalities. And that's a huge lesson at a young age. It really is.
Very.
And it goes back to the dinner thing. You're having dinner, and then you learn, well, Henry had a fight got into a little tissy with one of the workers or whatever, or a customer, or there's just so many things.
Okay. And this last one, I think people would be interested to hear about the last one. First of all, it's the one that's the biggest, that goes the most contrary to this poll that we were talking about, because the poll is showing that people are putting marriage and family on the back burner, and they're prioritizing and valuing money more, which is just so sad. Um, that starts with what you teach your kids. That those values came about for a reason. And a lot of it had to do with a whole generation of kids, women in particular, but kids, being pulled away from getting married and having families and being so career focused. Money, 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 career, career, career. That's all anybody ever talks about. It's like there's nothing else to life but that. And so, you reap what you sow. I feel like it's taken a generation to get where we are. But if you want to raise your kids with different values than what is happening today, you can do it. And you do it by reversing that completely. That relationships and family are the most important thing in life, and a career is a means to an end. It's not the be all end all. It's just something you do to support this more important thing.
Yep.
And both of our kids got that message. And I think if they were here, I mean, I already know what they think. I know that they're relationship oriented, and that their values are not in line with what this poll is showing. I know that they're not. So that's what made me think of this idea of having you for our next parenting episode to talk about, well, our kids don't have those values that poll just showed.
Yeah.
Why don't they? And
Yeah.
it's because of the way they were raised. So anybody can do that. There's nothing special about Bill and me. We were just committed to it early on, all along the way, because of our upbringings, and we have kind of, other reasonings for that. But I'm just trying to be helpful in terms of showing other people that it can be done.
Yeah, I think I would say this. I think that both of them realize, both Emma and Henry realize, that money is kind of a means to an end. Excuse me, but it's not the end of all means. So, the reality is that they've learned that relationships are everything that we have in this world. I mean, really, that's a big part of why we're here. Our kids and our legacy. That's our legacy. It's not the money. The money, we can't take it with us, and it just gets spent and can easily disappear in 2 seconds. Excuse me. But
should have got you some water.
It's the allergies. But the relationship piece is timeless. I mean, how you raise your kids and what you do with them, in hopes that they are able to make their own sound decisions in adulthood
and have their own families and
carries on. Whereas if you can break, I know from my own, we really never talked about my family, but my parents are divorced, and I was determined to never let that happen to my kids after what I experienced. And so we now, for 25 years, have broken that cycle, because it can be horrible. It can send generations into generation after generation of disastrous family situations. And my goal was to not let that happen, and was to point the ship in the other direction, towards the calmer waters, towards the open waters, and allow them to grow and become adults, strong-willed adults that can weather any storm and anything that hits them, and are just rock solid in their relationships.
And I do want to say, there were a couple things on here that we were going to put sex and money on here in terms of how do you do that in an old school way. And we decided that those topics are so big, we'd be here too long. So we're going to have separate episodes. Yeah. One is about how to teach your kids about sex, and how to talk to your kids about money. Or I reverse that. How to talk to your kids about sex and how to teach your kids about money. That's more of what I mean. And so those are too deep for today, but you could think of those as kind of an old school thing, because the way people are learning about money and sex today does not match the way we think.
No.
And the way we taught our kids. So we'll leave that for another day.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Bill, for joining me. I think people are really liking to hear from you. You're
Thanks, Suzanne.
Yeah.
I'm having fun.
Yeah, it's fun to have
Hopefully
you on here.
we can help some people.
All right,
Anyway,
guys.
I want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
About this beautiful woman that I have in front of me.
Oh my God.
We're going to do our 25th anniversary next month, and
Yeah.
I just cannot believe how fortunate I am to have met her. And I don't know, it was like some higher power brought me to her. So I just want to say how lucky I am, and I'm very blessed. And I'm glad that you all like to listen to her, and I know I do. I get her every day, so it's just a lot of fun.
Thank you.
It's been an
darling.
adventure.
Thank you, sweetie.
I love you.
I love you too.
All right.
Okay, guys. We'll
Bye-bye,
talk to you
everybody.
soon. Bye. And that ends this hour of the Suzanne Venker Show. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and to leave us a review, as well as share this episode with a friend. As always, you may reach me with any questions or comments at Suzanne@thesuzannevenkershow.com. And if you would like to support this podcast, which would be very much appreciated, you can do so at patreon.com/The Suzanne Venker Show. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.